Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is show the laser pointer. Can everybody see that? Or could someone unmute and let me know? Oh, I can see Becky nodding. Okay. Um, so the presentation from me today is about using Google Docs, which again is something that we talked about in the CST 500 course, which I will also endorse and suggest to everybody who hasn't yet taken it, that it's a great idea. But one of the benefits of the Google Doc method or strategy that we talked about was that it's sort of a low bandwidth way to communicate for your students. So if they don't have reliable internet, or if they have a family situation, like a sibling also online or something, where they couldn't have their camera on, they could still participate. And I also had students taking the classes in our like remote learning classrooms on campus, and so they didn't feel like they could chime in verbally to discussions because they were supposed to be being quiet and co-learning with strangers essentially. And so um, the Google Doc came out of that conversation, but for me it took a little bit of time to figure out like where I could use it, and what would make it helpful, and why it would be useful. And so I just want to share a couple of places where it really made a difference in a positive way. I will say that there's a ton of text on some of the slides just because I wanted to show you the setup of how the Google Doc looked. But don't worry about reading all of the text. If there's something important, I'll use this highlighter to direct you to it. Um, so the first thing, possibly, there we go. The first thing is that even the shy students were able to participate. And so this was especially important. I had a class of FYS students and a class of first year students who were taking chemistry. And while my goal would be for them to be able to chime in, with their own voices and with their whole identities, some of them were just a little bit afraid. I always think of myself as approachable, but sometimes the students, they disagree. Um, so here's an example. I set up a Google Doc for FYS for every single day of class. And so we would have check-ins, what things are going well, what things are you struggling with. And I think actually, I didn't start this until a couple of weeks into class, but especially for first year students, they have so many questions about how college is supposed to be happening. I think it would be useful in that way too. But here we have just around registration time, they have questions about abbreviations, or what are some due dates, et cetera, and I can answer those. Here, I'm sure what happened was somebody said, I want to register for a January class. Here I am replying in purple. I did that throughout the term. Purple is my favorite color. So you'll all see that plenty of times today too. But I think probably what happened was I verbally answered their question, like, here's how you do it, and then typed in, what to do if you need help. I'm still getting better at typing everything so that the document is complete. Here's a question, here's the full answer. In chemistry, there was a point a few weeks into class where I was feeling frustrated. I'm sure they were feeling frustrated, where maybe the expectations weren't certain or something. But I threw up a Google Doc and said, let me know what's going on. And for these students to have the chance to open up, share, admit they hadn't done any homework 3 weeks into class. Your class might be set up differently. My class, after 3 weeks, they should have done like 3 or 4 or 5 homework assignments. This is the program where they submit their homework assignments, so that if they don't even know how to log in, that's kind of a big deal. But by admitting this on the Google Doc, I could say to the whole class, okay, that's no problem. There's still a lot of homework points left. And then that allows that student to feel a little bit more comfortable. Several other students who maybe are having the same problem feel comfortable. And then they can say, okay, it was me. I still need help with grade scope, or whatever it is. So it sort of grew from being anonymous to building a little bit of confidence to ask a question as themselves. The second place where this was useful is in the sensitive topics venue. This is funny because I'm going to be sharing lots of my individual class with you. So I did a microaggressions, first identity session with my first year seminar students, and then a microaggressions lesson. And so by doing the Google Doc, they can all participate, even if they're afraid, because privilege and marginalization might be hard to talk about. In this column here, you can see that a lot of them are talking about privilege as being with race or money. And then we went through an activity where there's actually 22 categories. And so then I could ask them, okay, how many of those 22 categories are you in the privilege group? And then they could feel free to answer without having to say, to disclose, some of them are kind of personal family status, health issues, et cetera. They don't have to disclose what their privilege groups or marginalized groups are, but they can share how many. And so that was useful. And then after we talked about microaggressions, came back and sort of, wrapped up, what does that mean? What does a microaggression mean? And then asked them to share, have you made that mistake in the past? Lots of them, once they figured out what it was, realized that that was a mistake they had made. You see the student is feeling some regret. And as you get to know the students, I know who wrote that, just based on personality, but they, it doesn't have to be known. And also the anonymity allows them to be more reflective, I think. If you have to speak up as you're less likely to be thinking about, have you made a mistake? You're just a little bit more defensive, I feel like. So another benefit was the opportunity to give real-time feedback to each of them. So here was an assignment where they were supposed to write thank you notes. And one of the challenges I have with most of my first year students is that when you ask them to describe, why they're grateful for something, or, tell them about the experience, tell you about an experience they had, they'll say, oh, it was really meaningful. Oh, I really appreciated it. And then, with a student, I'll, try to pull out more information. Why was it meaningful? How did it make an impact on you? Oh, it just really did. I really appreciate, blah, blah, blah. And so in this case, each student had a couple of these rows where they were thinking about a specific person, and then they're talking about what that person meant to them, or what their conversation or their experience with that person was about. And so I'm able to ask, again, I'm in purple on the Google Doc in class, asking, okay, why is that important? Or, what are you thinking about? Why do you think that it is so important to you? Over here, giving some encouragement, or, asking for a little bit more detail, so that each student, instead of, maybe thinking about a couple of students in the class having a chance to share and have this conversation, each student can benefit from that in real time. Okay, and then finally, the opportunity for the students to be nice to each other. It was sort of unexpectedly heartwarming. Here on the left, I did an activity with our chemistry capstone students. They're writing personal statements, and so the task was for them to think about a couple of things that they are good at. And so you can see that they wrote in black. Each of the individual students wrote about themselves, what they're good at. But then their classmates were also in on the Google Doc and could add in things in a different color. So this student didn't think that they were easy to work with, but somebody else was able to share that about them. And so the next set, which I haven't shown because there's way too much text to read through, but they're supposed to think about a story that describes or illustrates one of their strengths. And so again, their classmates were able to chime in too. Well, don't you remember about this time we were working on such and such together? And so that was a really good way both to have the students help each other, to have them help each other in terms of their own self-esteem. Sometimes strengths are hard to come up with, but also to help each other in terms of thinking about their personal statement. This was a really heartwarming example where the student couldn't think of a single thing, and he actually wrote, I don't have any strengths. But his classmates were able to add in a few things and sort of encourage him. Over here on the right, this is the last day of class, or maybe it was the finals week, we were doing presentations. And one of the students wrote that they were nervous. Another one, this is not me, it's on purple, gave some encouragement. And then, they're talking to each other. That, it's anonymous, they don't know, but I think even the idea of encouraging anonymously was more palatable than saying, oh, hey, I know something good about student X. So those are just some examples of how the Google Doc has been helpful. Also, thinking about the modules and setting up the Blackboard page, the students have the links to each of these Google Docs. So if they miss class, or if they want to go back and refresh their memory on something that happened, they can go and review the record of class. So that's all I have to share about Google Docs. If you'd like to ask any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Colleen, I'm going to pop in here just because I am personing the chat. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I can read them. But Kimberly had asked a question in the chat a little bit ago, asking if you're this is sort of like a chat throughout the duration of the class. Then, I guess was the question she was asking.
Oh, are you running this? Oh, so I think this is Andy actually, but it's fine. Still a good question. But anyway, so are you running this like a chat throughout the class? So for my chemistry class, and I said this in the title, but I forgot to say, I was hybrid for almost all of the class periods, with half the students in person and half of them remote. So in the chemistry class, I ran or I opened the Google Doc every single day, like a chat. So they could ask questions in the Blackboard Collaborate chat, or they could ask questions in the Google Doc. So that does add a little bit of emotional bandwidth for me, because then I'm doing my own, we're working out a problem or whatever that is, and I'm monitoring the Blackboard chat, and I'm monitoring the Google Doc. But the students were actually okay about like pointing out, oh, something popped up, so go check that. So that worked out okay. In the FYS class, it was more sort of whole class period long discussions. And so we were sort of working from top to bottom on a long Google Doc. So first at the top, there'd be the check-in, and then there might be a table where they each entered the reflections on a short reading, and then maybe breakout groups to do to enter in the Google Doc within your group some of your collective thoughts on a reading, those sorts of things. But they for each class, they were open for the whole time.
This is Eric. A follow-up question. In using this, did you have that open in between classes as well? I mean, could they access the Google Doc at any time? And then I think you addressed this. Did you use this instead of Collaborate chat during class? It sounds like you had both running simultaneously. So you're monitoring one more tool.
Right. So I did have them both running simultaneously. I could have turned off the chat in Blackboard, I suppose, but it actually, the way my screen was set up, it worked out okay to sort of have it, there was a spot for it, I guess. The first question was, oh, right. For the chemistry class, I left it open with the idea that students would pop in while they were doing their homework and ask a question about, problem 16 on chapter 5. And then, I'd be able to address that. But it turned out nobody really popped in. They really mainly checked in during class.
Okay.
I was also worried that folks might not be able to participate if they didn't have a device in class. But even though I didn't expect it, they all brought one out. So it turned out to be okay on that front.
Okay, great. Oh, and one aside, as you were doing it here, you mentioned at the start of this class, you were going over microaggressions. A friend of mine showed me a video that I put into the chat window on microaggressions. It's really wonderful. So that's something you might want to take a look at.
Sure, thank you. I co-opted the diversity lecture in FYS, doing it myself, and it has sort of worked. But maybe we can
Cool.
definitely take a look at that for next fall.
Sure.
Thanks.
Colleen, I'm wondering, did you find particularly in the online space where students are talking about microaggressions and privilege, sometimes very difficult topics for students to understand, do you feel like they were more engaged in the virtual space versus having kind of the interpersonal dynamics of having that conversation face to face in class?
Sure. Actually, Zoe, I'll have to apologize to her. She gave me the great feedback to include this in the presentation, but I forgot. um, so I ran the same, approximately the same training in fall of 19 and fall of 20. Fall of 19, we were in person, although we had just gone through the events of the October of 2019. So maybe not the same direct comparison, but yes, short answer, yes. They were more willing to participate. You know, I was upfront in both semesters that it's super awkward. It's hard to talk about a lot of these things and to read words that you have been trained not to say, et cetera. But definitely they, in this setting, were able to sort of share in the awkward with me and own it a little bit more, where I was doing much more of the talking and reflecting when they all had to participate, you know, face to face.